Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am back continuing on with 60 Nights of Fright. How's my Vincent Price? I don't know. Y'all tell me. Do I have a little bit more work to do on it, right? And everything. Something I'm trying to do throughout the course of 60 Nights of Fright on JayMovieTalk. And everything. But yeah. So I kicked it off last week, as I did Evil Dead 2. And I did ask a couple of questions. One particular question I asked, the question I asked on Threads was that Evil Dead walks a fine line between horror and comedy. So I asked this to my Threads Vault crew and everything. And the options was it's horror, it's comedy, or it's a perfect mix. And with 53% of the vote, you guys said perfect mix. And I feel the same way because it is a perfect mix. It is a perfect blend. I believe I also said that in the episode of that. That is one of the reasons why I enjoy Evil Dead 2 as much as I do, because it is that perfect blend of horror and comedy. The Evil Dead is a horror film with some comedy in it. Army of Darkness is a comedy with some horror in it, but Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, is a perfect blend of horror and comedy. So I want to thank everyone who voted on that poll, and I will be talking about some other polls that I have for this particular episode that I'm doing. And like I said in the opener, I am going to be talking about my top 10 horror movie villains. So basically the way I kind of came down to this is, you have the impact of the character, the scares that they elicit in their films, and their legacy, and also to some of my personal favorites. That is basically how I came up with my list for this countdown, because there are countless horror movie villains. You have the official villains, and then also too you have the unofficial villains. But I'm not going to go into talking about the unofficial villains. I might actually do unofficial villains on a YouTube video. So if I do that, I will definitely let you guys know, so you can check that out, of me talking about the unofficial horror movie villains, because there are a lot of those as well. All right, so let's get into the top 10. So coming in at number 10, from Black Christmas 1974, the one and only Billy. Billy kind of gets forgotten a little bit when we talk about horror movie villains and everything, but ironically enough, because he's kind of in that weird spot of, is right around the time, because we're talking about 1974, so this is close relatively around the time that you have Leatherface and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But if we're talking about pure slasher, this is a few years before Halloween, a few years before not Michael Myers, but a few years before Jason Voorhees, a decade before Freddy Krueger, and the countless other slasher killers that come along in the 80s on through into the 90s. And we never really, I think one thing that makes, for me at least, what makes Billy scary is that you never actually see him. And when you hear his voice on the phone, like all the gibberish and rambling that he does on the phone, and just him crashing out and stuff like that, it's like, what the hell is wrong with this dude? And the fact that you never actually get any type of closure about the character, and the fact that they never made a sequel, I think even makes him a little bit more scary. They just kind of leave it in the air with the way that movie ends. And the fact, like I say, the fact that here we do get the POV shot. I mean, like I say, again, before we get the Michael Myers and stuff like that, we get the POV shot from Billy. And like I say, the few instances of where, I know the one scene where, we get to see his eye kind of peeking through the doorway, and it's like, who the hell is that? Or when what's her name, Olivia Hussey's character is trying to not Barb, that's Margot Kidder, but when Olivia Hussey's character is trying to run away, and then his hand just comes out of nowhere and yanks her back by the hair. It's like this dude is a freaking madman, and everything. But he comes in at my number 10. He makes the list at number 10. So Billy from Black Christmas 1974 is number 10. Coming in at number 9. Now this pint-sized villain, talking about from the movie Orphan, talking about the one and only Esther. Now, the interesting thing about Isabella Fuhrman's performance is that you really don't get to, I would say there's more of a psychological edge to her character, where she's a villain and she is very unassuming because she's pint-sized, especially in the first movie. She's relatively a little kid, but she's supposed to be a lot older, right? And then in the second movie where she's a villain, but then she's also a victim in the second movie. But I think Isabella, she does a very good job of, just giving off the creepy vibes in those movies, and everything. And it's more like psychological because here she is, this grown woman that's pretending to be these people's child, and it's just insane. And like I say, it's more of a psychological thing, opposed to the physical horror, because she's not physically opposed. I mean, hell, we see her get kind of hoisted a few times in the second movie, and stuff like that, and she just kind of like bumbles her way out of basically being taken over by that family in the second movie. And Julia Stiles is really the true villain of that movie. Like I said, so if I do my unofficial horror movie villains, like I say, she might actually end up on that conversation. But Esther comes in at number 9. Number 8, from Trick or Treat, Little Sam. I mean, he is the mascot of that movie, and for majority of the movie he doesn't really do anything except for when he gets into the house with Brian Cox's character and they battle, and boy, if Brian Cox wasn't in for a fight of his life, and when you find out, well, he kind of deserved what came his way. But the fact that throughout the course of the movie, we just kind of see him, because the movie is an anthology, and Little Sam, he just pops in and out, at different points and everything, he's just there. But the fact that he is, just there, and he is like he's the Halloween ghost. And for the people who did wrong, when he shows up, because ironically, he shows up at different points in all of the stories. Of course, he has, the big, fight and everything with Brian Cox's character in that movie, in his particular story. But throughout the rest of the story, he does like just show up, and it's like he's almost like how oranges are in The Godfather. If an orange shows up, somebody's gonna die, and basically when Little Sam shows up, somebody's gonna die. And relatively everyone, with the exception of the werewolves, die for the most part, and everything. And I think he is one of like the modern like horror icons, and the fact that we still haven't got a sequel to that movie, it's like there's a missed opportunity there, because there should have been a sequel to that movie. It could have been a franchise at this point because of Halloween, Trick or Treat. It would have been perfect to do like an anthology, series, movie every year, or every 2 years, and Sam is, just kind of present throughout. It would have been, like I say, missed opportunity right there. So coming in at number 7, one Miss Angela Baker from Sleepaway Camp. And I'm only talking about the first movie. I'm not talking about the sequels, but just the first movie. Felissa Rose and her performance of Angela, which for the I would say 98% of the movie she says and really does nothing. But it's the reveal at the end, of course. And if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. That reveal at the end of her and then the mouth wide open and stuff like that and everything. And just how she, she's very unassuming. Because I'm pretty sure as you're watching the movie for the first time, Angela is the last character that you are thinking is doing this. If anything, you're thinking Ricky is the one that's doing all the killing. Yeah. So it just makes me wonder and everything. But Angela, she definitely is up there as far as horror movie villains, and like I say, the whole thing with the camp horror and the taboo topics that we get, especially with that cook, and he rightfully got what he deserved, which is ironic that he doesn't actually die. He just gets scalded real bad and everything. But there's a lot going on in that movie. And then it kind of raises the question, is Angela a villain or is she also a hero? Because with the exception of Paul, everybody that gets got in that movie kind of deserved it to a degree. I mean, I don't think the one kid that she murdered out there on the boat and stuffed him and everything, I don't think he really so much deserved it. But Judy definitely got what she deserved. Meg got what she deserved. Mel, he got what he deserved, and everything. The cook especially got what he deserved. But it kind of raises the question, is she a hero or is she a villain? So that it could also be like looked at as different interpretation. But Angela Baker comes in at number 7 for me. Now, coming in at number 6. Now, this one might shock people because you don't really think of it as necessarily a character, but it is a character. And I'm talking about Death in the Final Destination franchise. I mean, it's an invisible villain. It's not like Freddy Krueger where it's only in your dreams or anything. You don't see death. And the fact that throughout the course of this franchise, like the overarching thing is you can't cheat death. You might be able to prolong it, but you can't cheat it. So how do you really win against death? And Tony Todd's character, Bloodworth, the late great Tony Todd, R.I.P., his character throughout the course of the franchise. Now, is he the devil? Is he death? We never fully find that out, but he's basically telling these people, like, you can't cheat it. And for however long you might survive, but death will always get you. And everything. And I would say this, of the majority of the villains on my list, death has probably some of the most, creative and innovative kills that you see. I mean, why don't people drive behind, big trucks that have things poking out? It's probably because they saw Final Destination 2, the whole log truck scene and everything. I mean, Flight 180, yeah, I mean, that's a thing or whatever, but that whole thing with the pile up on the freeway, that one is creative. I would even say the roller coaster is another creative one. The bridge, that's a creative. But then also too, just like how because those are always the premonition kills. But then when you go through the course of the movie where the people who are trying to survive and everything, and those kills that we get, because I always say the best friend character in Final Destination, when he gets strangled in that bathtub, that is, it's heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's very innovative because it's like death literally has him by the hook, in a way. And I would say what makes death, a great villain is that the kill sequences are great opposed to just the traditional slasher kills, right? But yeah, and also too, it's inevitable. You never win against death. You just survive for as long as you can. But even then it can be what, a few weeks, it can be years, it can be decades, according to bloodlines, right? But at some point, death will always get you. So that's why death comes in at number 6. So coming in at number 5. Now this is one of my all-time favorites. And he would be ranked higher if the other 4 were not around. And I'm talking about good old Chucky. Charles Lee Ray himself. Brad Dourif does some of his best voice work, and the dark humor that he has throughout the course of this franchise and everything is top tier. A performance by him, and I think if we were giving voice actors like Oscars and stuff like that, Brad Dourif definitely should have one for his voice work as the voice of Chucky, because nobody else could do what he did with the voice of Chucky, and that includes Mark Hamill with that remake, right? There's a reason why Brad Dourif is Chucky. There can be only one Chucky, right? To paraphrase Wesley Snipes in as Blade in Deadpool and Wolverine, right? I mean, it's the killer doll, and they take the killer doll, aspect and flip it on his head, because in that first movie, up until you finally see him moving around and everything, you kind of assume, is it Andy? And they actually make you think that it possibly is Andy doing it. Until, Mrs. Barkley, you talk to me, damn it, I'm gonna throw you to the fire. And he comes like, oh, you bitch, filthy slut, I teach you to fuck with me. That whole thing. When he comes alive, but up until that point, you really don't know if it's really him or not and everything. And I think that's what makes him great, is that he's basically like Andy's toys in Toy Story. Ironically, his name is Andy, right? Because, somebody comes into the room, I can just lay over here and play dead. But then when they're not looking, they get stabbed in the back and trying to figure out what the hell just happened, right? And the fact that how long the franchise has been around, because the first movie came out in 1988, and you've had a number of sequels. You had a quote unquote remake, reboot, reimagining, whatever. And then you had the TV series. And the fact that if you just say Chucky or whatever, people know who he is. He's a horror icon. He's part of pop culture. And Brad Dourif, like I say, is just phenomenal, doing the voice work. I would have loved to see more of the Charles Lee Ray version and him. And I do appreciate in the TV show that we do get to see like Brad Dourif, even though it's the ghost, but still it's Brad, doing the character at least, because even though we just get the voice for so long, it is nice to see Brad, because one thing about Brad Dourif is a great actor. I know he's only pretty much known by, depending on your age, he's only known for being Chucky, but the man has a whole freaking career outside of just being Chucky. And I mean, for me, he's an acting giant, because he checks off every box. He could do everything. I mean, of course, he just kind of leaned more into, the Chucky stuff, but at the same time, the man has a whole entire career that is just great. Really, if you do a deep dive on Brad Dourif and like outside of, his Chucky stuff, because matter of fact, a few episodes back, I reviewed Fatal Beauty, and he plays a villain in that, and it's dope seeing him like running around with a damn Uzi or whatever the hell that was, and it's almost like I won't say like a alt-world version of Charles Lee Ray to a degree. So coming in at number 4. Now, this one is always kind of up for interpretation, because it's similar to Angelo. Is he a villain or is he a anti-hero to a degree? And I'm talking about Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Of course, this is one of a few horror characters that was inspired by the real life killer Ed Gein. And in a way, you kind of feel somewhat sympathy for Leatherface at certain points, because you realize, like, his family members are a lot worse than he is. I mean, he's kind of just, going along with the family because the Saw is family, type of thing. He's kind of just going along with it. He's not the true quote unquote villain. Especially in the first movie, it's like, well, is the hitchhiker more the villain, or is the cook more the villain? And Leatherface is just, because it could we really think about it, Leatherface is really just protecting his home in that first movie, because he's trying to figure out where the hell all these people keep coming from. Why the hell y'all coming in my house? Because that's what it was. Leatherface wasn't going outside; they were going into his house, and he was just protecting his home. So, is he truly a villain, or is he a anti-hero? Because I'm not gonna call him a hero. Is he an anti-hero, right? To a degree. And I mean, throughout the course of the franchise, because the franchise is kind of all over the place, and that's one of the few things about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise that I don't like, that it is literally all over the place. And sometimes they're Sawyers, and sometimes they're Hewitts, and it's like, okay, which is which? And we've seen him die, but then he isn't dead, and it's like, who are all these family members and where they come from, and stuff like that. But the fact that you do get the whole, out in the middle of nowhere, this farmhouse, and then you get this cannibal family, this murdering folks, and then you got Leatherface, who's this big imposing dude just running around with this chainsaw, because just like Ash and Evil Dead 2, the chainsaw that literally kicks up on one pull, and they just, type of thing. And it's like, good grief, like, wait a minute. Most chainsaws, you got to pull that thing at least 2-3 times, but his is just one start. And it's like, is it a push button on this thing or something? But yeah, I mean, and then of course that chainsaw. I mean, the fact that you take a chainsaw and you turn it into a weapon, this iconic horror movie weapon. And if you notice, like, as the franchise went on, the chainsaw kind of became the symbol of the movies in a way, along with Leatherface. But the chainsaw, because even in the second movie, when the cook says the Saw is family, and everything, and it's like, yeah, the Saw is, there's something about the chainsaw. And I'm not sure if any of because I haven't seen every single movie in relation to Leatherface, because there's some of those newer ones that I haven't seen, where Leatherface is like a teenager and stuff like that. I don't know if they actually go into that, but it always has been kind of interesting about the connection with him and his chainsaw. And I would love to know more about, like, how did that become his weapon of choice, in a way. So, coming in at number 3. Now, I think this might shock some people that he's this low on the list, but he is. Talking about another silent killer, one Mr. Michael Myers, from the Halloween franchise. And I mean, John Carpenter's original concept was that he was the living, breathing epitome of pure evil. And if you listen to everything that Dr. Loomis says throughout that movie, that is what he's talking about Michael Myers is. There's no rhyme, there's no reason. Black as eyes, the darkest eyes, right? He's just the walking, he's evil on 2 legs. That's all it is, right? He's the shape. He doesn't even have realistically, he doesn't even have anything. He's just the shape. Even though Michael Myers is the vessel, but really it's just the shape. And, my thing has always been the debate of, well, do you like the pure evil backstory, or do you like what Rob Zombie did by giving him this human backstory, which was very stereotypical because he was bullied as a kid. He harmed animals and stuff like that. All the stereotypical, tropes of what a serial killer, is and everything. But I leave that for interpretation. Either you like one or the other. Me personally, I like the more of the pure evil thing, and everything like that. But the fact that he's very simple in the standpoint of he wears this William Shatner mask, and he's very silent. And if anything, the 2018 version showed just how silent he is because he's in a backyard with motion sensor lights, and he moves so slow that the lights don't even turn on until he actually goes to try to kill that kid Oscar and everything. That's how silent Michael Myers is. And that's scary in itself, because how can you get away from someone who moves so stealthy like that? Like if he was I'll say this, if he was like in Call of Duty, Warzone or whatever, he'd probably win every time, because hell, the man just moves so quiet, no one even sees him or whatever. Right. And the stalking thing, that is one of the things about Michael Myers that I really like, is how he stalks people before he actually even does anything. He's like a shark who kind of just circles around. He's just, I'm just watching for a while, and then he strikes out of nowhere. And that's something that I think adds a little bit more to the fear factor of what Michael Myers is the way he kind of stalks you for a while before he actually engages. And then the franchise itself. I mean, the franchise has been around since 1978. And, you've had countless sequels. You've had the remakes. Well, you have two. Well, see, okay, so that's the funny thing about it. Rob Zombie's is a remake. The 2018's is more of a reboot, because it's not so much a remake, it's a reboot, because you're continuing on the story, but you're adding more to it in a sense, and you're ignoring, over half the franchise. And I think that's where things kind of get kind of janky, similar to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, of where it kind of starts to get all over the place if you're trying to follow the timelines and stuff. And if you think about it, the fact that Laurie Strode has 3 kids in 3 different timelines, and it's like, okay, whatever. But as far as Michael Myers, one thing about him, he stays pretty much the same. They don't change him too much. I mean, Rob Zombie did add the whole family aspect and things like that, but when he was Michael Myers, he still was that silent, stalking killer. So like I say, at his core, he never fully changes, which I always enjoy. And then, like I say, the franchise itself, it helped redefine what a slasher was, because after this, you get, all these, slasher killers of the 80s, and it all kind of starts with Michael Myers. And that's why I kind of go back to my number 10 choice of good old Billy, who I think he was just a few years too early, but I don't think we really get Michael Myers without Billy and Black Christmas. I really don't. And everything. So in a way, the way Michael Myers might be the father of the horror slashers, Billy could be considered the grandfather of the slasher, because if there's no Billy, there might not be a Michael, and without Michael, you don't get Jason Voorhees, and everything. So coming in at number 2, talking about the dream demon himself, the clown prince of horror, if you will. I'm talking about the one and only Mr. Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I mean, if you're not, the one thing about the Nightmare on Elm Street movies and what makes Freddy so scary is that he gets you while you sleep, even when you sleep, which is a SOS band song, which I always kind of wondered why they never used that song in any of their movies, because that song is perfect for a Nightmare on Elm Street. Even when you sleep, that I will be there even when you sleep. All right, it's perfect. But he's the dream world killer, and he kills you, when you sleep at your most vulnerable. You're asleep. You're supposed to be at peace, but you can't even rest in your sleep, because there's freaking Freddy Krueger in that damn hat and that ugly sweater and that damn hand just coming after you, right? And what makes Freddy Krueger so great, in my opinion, I mean, I've talked about quite a few characters on this list, but what makes Freddy work so perfect is Robert Englund. Similar to Brad Dourif with Chucky, it doesn't work without them. It's the same thing how I feel about Freddy Krueger. Robert Englund is Freddy Krueger. There can be only one Freddy Krueger, and that's Robert Englund. Sorry, Jackie Earl Haley, but there's only one, and there's a reason why. Well, there's a number of reasons why we didn't get more from his version of Freddy Krueger in Nightmare on Elm Street, but there's a reason why there's an entire franchise. Why it was dubbed, why New Line Cinema was dubbed the house that Freddy built, is because Robert Englund's performance of Freddy Krueger. And in the first movie, he is very scary, menacing. He doesn't say like any funny things. He just outright, just menacing and, this killer. Of course, he gets that little sadistic laugh and everything. But as the franchise goes along, yes, he does bring in more of the charisma, the wisecracking jokes and one-liners and things like that. But Robert Englund just takes that character and becomes something completely different. And I think that's one thing that people always enjoyed about the character, even though you're not supposed to really like the character because of his backstory, right? But you do like the horror character because Robert Englund is so great in the role of Freddy Krueger. And I like in New Nightmare with the whole thing of when he in costume of Freddy, he comes out on the stage and how the little kids and he's waving his hands back and forth, and Heather Langenkamp, she's sitting there, she's just looking like she's like mesmerized, but at the same time it's like she's fearful because it's like, why do these people like this character so much? He's a child killer, but the kids love him so. And that is one thing about the Freddy Krueger character that has always kind of been very interesting to me, is how society, well, I say not society, but the horror fans, I should say, how we love this character even though we should not love this character. Because again, if you go by his backstory, you should not like this character at all. But it's Robert Englund's charisma and the way he performs the character of what we really enjoy about it. And the fact that he talks, unlike a lot of the other characters on this list, they don't do a lot of talking. Billy, of course, does a whole bunch of, it's slut, stuff like that. But other than that, outside of, on my list at least, outside of Chucky, Freddy Krueger is the only one that talks. And they both, talk and they have a big personality. And I think that's what makes those type of characters great, is because they're right there with you. He's not just some silent killer. It's the fact that it's a actual person, behind the killer, in a sense. And I wouldn't necessarily say that he's a anti-hero. He's definitely not. He is the true villain of Freddy Krueger is. And that's why even in Freddy versus Jason, you have the sympathy for Jason opposed to Freddy Krueger, because Freddy is the true damn villain of that movie and of the franchise, and everything. So coming in at number one, and I did go back and forth between number one and number two, but for some reason, and I will explain why, Jason Voorhees is my number one. The fact that he has evolved over the course of this long running franchise, and how in the first movie, no, he is not the killer. And even though good old Casey Becker in Scream, it's Jason, it was Jason, I've seen that movie 1,000 times. Well, if you've seen it 1,000 times, you know that it wasn't Jason, it was his mother. He didn't come along until the sequel, that whole thing, right? And which is true. He doesn't come along until the sequel, even though Alice has that fever dream out there in the lake where Jason rises up and pulls under the water, because, man, we didn't find any boy. That means he's still out there, right? So the fact that he evolves from being just talked about in the first movie and, the kind of jump scare at the end, we go from that to being the main villain, and how he evolved from being just a cautionary tale in the first movie to being this, kind of deformed wrong turn, fallout looking fella in the second movie to, oh, I got to switch it up a bit because the cops is on my back, type of thing. So I got to get some new clothes and shave my head and all this. And I'm going to go fumble around in this barn for like an hour and a half, to where I end up getting hacked in the head. And then I die. And not only do he die, he comes back as a zombie and he's even more imposing. So it's like the evolution of the character. And throughout the course of this franchise, and I will say this, that Jason, he is definitely he's a villain, but he's also a anti-hero at the same time, because one of the first Friday the 13th movies that I seen, which was Jason Take Manhattan. That was the first one I saw as a kid, right? And in that movie, there's a portion of that movie where Jason is not the villain. He's actually a hero because he saves Rennie from these no goods that drugged her and they tried to rape her. And Jason comes, he actually saves her. And if you ever watch that scene again where Rennie finally gets the dead guy off of her and she takes off and run while Jason was killing the other dude, when he turns around and he sees her running away, he does kind of give like a little head nod. And it's like, is that Lord like a you're welcome type of thing? And because when you really think about it, he never actually tries to kill Rennie. I mean, yes, he goes after her, but was he really trying to kill Rennie? Which, I mean, that's a whole nother story, that I could go into and talk about, because there's a lot of stuff that kind of is questioned, like a lot of Jason motives when it comes to certain characters throughout the course of the franchise, just like Chris in part 3. Like, is he the guy who attacked her in the woods? We never fully know, but we kind of assume it is, because that whole, no, it can't be, and everything. He does kind of give her that little sleazy smile when he pulls the mask up and then puts it back on. So you get like little instances like that of Jason throughout the course of the franchise. But is he a villain, anti-hero? That is up for interpretation, right? But he is my number one because unlike a lot of the other characters on this list, you get a full evolution of the character. And he goes from being a sympathetic character, because he's the way he's talked about in the first movie, especially how Mrs. Voorhees talks about him in the first movie, to where he is a outright killer. And then you learn a lot about his backstory. It's funny how they kind of throw in little nuggets about his family throughout the course of the franchise. And one thing I've always enjoyed about the franchise is that even though you have multiple directors throughout this franchise, they all kind of keep the same energy when it comes to Jason for the most part, and everything. And then of course, going back to like, Freddy Krueger has the knives for fingers, that's iconic. And then of course, Leatherface with the chainsaw. Jason is the hockey mask. That hockey mask is, that is the brand. That is the thing that you see whenever you think about Friday the 13th, Jason Voorhees. The first thing you think about, hockey mask killer, right? And the fact that they would kind of make little jokes about it in other movies. If somebody had on a hockey mask, it's Jason, right? Type of thing. That just shows you like how ingrained in the pop culture that he became, and everything. And the fact that he is literally like the embodiment and unstoppable, terror. I mean, just like Michael Myers, he's the pure evil on two legs. Jason is literally the unstoppable force in a way. And that is why he is my number one, because of the evolution of the character over the years and how very consistent, I would say, of all the slasher franchises, I would say that Friday the 13th might be the most consistent of them all. And everything. The fact that you have multiple directors across, but they all keep that one core thing intact, which is what makes Jason Voorhees Jason Voorhees. And then you have the different versions of Jason, because you have the actual living, breathing version from 2 through 4. You have the fake Jason in part 5. And then you have the zombie Jason throughout the rest of the franchise. And then also Jason X, you have Uber Jason, right? Because the nanobites and all that, and he gets a brand new suit, he gets a makeover, right? And everything. But that is why he's my number 1. So that is my top 10. Now, I couldn't just get in and get out and say, oh, just give the top 10 and I'm gone. No. I do have some honorable mentions because, like I say, there's a lot of horror characters to choose between, right? So here are a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make the top 10. So here's one. I put the Overlook Hotel from The Shining. I mean, it is a villain because that place is evil and everything. And it has a lot of freaking victims over the years. And everything. It is, and like I said, it's a great villain because, it's just a hotel. It's like, yeah, come on in. Yep. You be here for a while. Next thing you know, you're sitting in a room and you're giving that 1,000-yard stare, and then you're trying to hack up your whole freaking family and everything. And it's the fact that it's literally in the middle of nowhere, and that psychological dread that you feel when you're there, and how it entices you. Because one of the great things about The Shining is the slow descent into madness that Jack Nicholson's character goes through. And I always feel like the scene that really brings it home in that aspect is that scene when he's at the bar talking to Lloyd, and he offers him that drink, and him accepting the drink is basically him giving his soul to the Overlook Hotel at that point. And like I said, that is like one of the best scenes in that movie for me because of how well it is acted. And then, like I say, it's the little subliminal, because you could look at Lloyd as the devil in a way, and here's the deal. Here's that drink. And by drinking, now you belong to me. And that's what happens. And everything. So the Overlook Hotel is an honorable mention. Now, this one is a personal thing for me because this is one of the characters that I saw at a very young age, and it had a very big impact on me for a long time. It still somewhat does to this day. And I'm talking about Pennywise, and I'm not talking about Bill Skarsgård. I'm talking about Tim Curry's version of Pennywise, because I actually saw the TV miniseries of it when it aired originally. And I watched it by myself. I think I was like 4 or 5 years old, and watching that and just watching Tim Curry's performance, it really scared the hell out of me, because one of the things I don't think gets talked about a lot, and I don't think they do this I know they don't because I've seen them. They don't do this with the Bill Skarsgård ones, is that there's a lot of breaking the fourth wall with Tim Curry's character in it. And I think that's what kind of adds to him being scary, even though he's, trying to be funny because he's a clown and everything. But at the same time, it's that breaking of the fourth wall where he's not talking to the character and he's looking straight in the camera. He's looking right at you. And for me, the scene that always drives that home, there's 2 scenes. The opening scene where he gets the little girl between the sheets, where she's there riding on a little tricycle, and she turns, she looks, she don't see anything, and she's going back and forth. Then all of a sudden he appears. That whole thing, right? That always kind of freaked me out. But the one scene that really drives it home for me in that regard is when Bill is out there and he's at the cemetery and he looks over and you see all the graves that's been dug up, and then that one that's buried, because that's Stanley, and Pennywise pops up and he's looking, and it's basically, he just kind of looks at him, but it's from the POV of Bill, so it's not Bill, it's really you, the viewer, that he's looking at. And it's the little things like that of him just breaking the fourth wall. So it's kind of similar to how Jack Torrance does in The Shining, where at different points Jack Nicholson suddenly do little slights of looking straight at the camera, which adds a little bit more to like you're a part of this, like you are a part of it, and you really don't get that too much. Not just in you really don't get that too much, I should say, in movies anymore, of that little slight of breaking the fourth wall, looking at the camera, in indirect ways that kind of adds a little bit more of the terror and everything to it. But that is why he's an honorable mention, but he just didn't quite make the top 10 list, even though he probably should, because if it was just a personal thing, he definitely would be on the list for me, and everything. Another honorable mention is The Collector from Demon Knight, Billy Zane. I mean, he's full of energy, and Billy Zane is great in that damn movie. Oh, Sheriff, if only you knew who I was and everything. Oh, we'll find out. Why wait? Type of thing. And the fact that he's kind of lusting after Jada Pinkett's character of Geraldine throughout the movie, which is kind of hilarious in a way. But he's an underrated villain. And when we talk about horror movie villains, sometimes the Collector kind of gets forgotten, but I think he's a fun villain. And everything. He does, like I say, Billy Zane is great in the movie. The movie Demon Knight overall is great. But Billy Zane, you can tell like he was having a lot of fun with that movie. And I've never really like looked to see any interviews him talking about Demon Knight. I probably should. I might do that after I'm done with this episode. But like I said, I would love to know love to see him talking about Demon Knight and just what he thought about doing the movie and everything. Because it's like I said, it is a fun character. Another movie that deserved a sequel, a direct sequel, and everything. But yeah, he's an honorable mention, but I think I had too many characters similar to him on the actual top 10, so that's why he didn't make the list. And the last honorable mention that I would talk about is because I have talked a little bit about, our character, is a character a villain or is he an anti-hero? And this particular character, he is kind of the epitome of that. And I'm talking about good old John Kramer, Jigsaw himself. Is he a true villain or is he an anti-hero? Because he do give people, live or die. It's your choice. All you have to do is just sit with me because your son is in a safe place. All right. Little things like that throughout that franchise. And I do feel like that the biggest mistake that was made with the Saw franchise was killing off John Kramer in part 3. I really do believe that. Because after that, yes, you want to introduce, his disciples, his proteges, and everything like that. But at the same time, none of them really, equate to what Tobin Bell does as Jigsaw, as John Kramer. And then, like I said, when you learn about the backstory of John Kramer, he has terminal cancer. He's a dying man. But then also too, when you find out like what happened with his wife, what drove him to his villain origin story. When you get that right, you start to have sympathy for the character. And then when you look at the people that he's putting into these traps, they're not the greatest of people. So again, is he a true villain or is he an anti-hero? And that's always up for interpretation when it comes to that character, because it's the morality game that he plays with people. And also I didn't include this because of the fact that Saw is like the granddaddy of the torture porn stuff. And I've never been really too big in the whole torture porn stuff. I did see a few of these in the movie theater, but at a certain point I just got kind of tired because it got to a point where the movies started being more about the traps than, just outright about evolving and continuously going with a story and everything. And I don't know, I'm kind of old school when it comes to like the horror killers and stuff like that. So that's kind of one reason why I didn't include him. But otherwise, he probably would have been on my list. I would say of these four that or honorable mentions that I'm talking about. John Kramer could have easily been on my list, but I just didn't include him because torture porn, and everything. So before I end up getting off of here, I do want to talk about what makes a great villain and why he resonates with horror fans. A lot of it has to do with the fear, the fascination of the killer. And then also too, it's a little bit of a rebellion type thing I've always thought about, because the killers are kind of moving very freely. They get to do what they want, and everything. And with all of the long-standing horror franchises, it gets to a point where the villain becomes the main character. You kind of don't even care about the quote-unquote main characters, because you get to a point where the Freddy Kruegers, the Michael Myers, the Jason Voorhees, the John Kramer Jigsaws, characters like that, they become the main characters, and everything and everyone around them becomes kind of secondary, and everything. But it's that whole thing of that where we as horror fans become fascinated with the killer, to a degree. Same thing can be said about Ghostface in the Scream movies, and everything, where you're fascinated more so by, well, who's behind the mask? And then when you find out, like, oh, okay. And things like that. It's that fascinating, aspect of what makes a really good horror villain. And then, and then the fact that you have some where you either rock with them because of the whole sympathetic aspect, like a Jason Voorhees, like a John Kramer. But then there's the unredeemable villains. Freddy Krueger is an unredeemable villain. Charles Lee Ray Chucky is an unredeemable villain. And everything. Even Angela, to a degree, is a sympathetic character, because once you realize why Angela is the way Angela is, there is a sympathetic reasoning behind that, and everything. So a few of the characters that you come across, and it's always like, well, why do you rock with them? And like I said, it's either because you feel some type of sympathetic way towards them, or the fact that even though they are irredeemable, but you just still like them because of the personalities and the charisma that they bring. So I'm going to ask you guys this question, and I will probably post this on Threads, but also you can hit me up on JayMovieTalk if you want to submit your answers as well. JayMovieTalk, gmail.com, that is www.jaymovietalk@gmail.com. If you want to submit your feedback and everything like that as well, if you don't want to hit me up on Threads. But question I'm gonna ask: which villain do you secretly root for when you're watching their movies? Like, who are you really rooting for? Me, I would say that at a certain point, I did get to a point where I started rooting for John Kramer. I'm not gonna lie, I did. In a few of the Friday the 13th, I'm actually rooting for Jason in those. Which is alright. Freddy, I'm never rooting for. Freddy, I'm always like, yeah, I can't wait to get his ass kicked. And I think that's one reason why I love Part 4 so much, because Alice whoops the hell out of him in that damn church. And I always tell people, the reason why Freddy had to learn how to fight in Freddy versus Jason is because what Alice did to him in Part 4. I always say that. But yeah, I would love to know, which villain do you secretly root for and why? And everything. As I'm kind of going through the whole 60 Nights of Fright, I don't know. Don't ask me why I say it like that. I think that's kind of becoming a thing now, where anytime I say it, I'm just going to say it like that. And I know I do a piss poor Vincent Price, but y'all just going to have to rock with me with that. All right. So, yeah. But anyway, while I'm doing my 60 Nights of Fright, I'm going to be talking about the difference of practical effects and the makeup. And generally, when talking about horror stuff, you are going to get, the practical stuff from back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s. And then as you kind of come up in the current day, you do have like the CGI and stuff like that. So that's going to be a running theme throughout these episodes as well. But what makes an iconic horror villain look great is their makeup. And I mean, the Freddy Burns, like how his face looks. Even though in a few of them does look kind of because depending on who is doing the makeup, but at the same time, you get this look on him like he's deformed, he's burned. And even when like the characters are describing him, oh, he wears a dirty brown hat and his face is, burned up and everything like that. He has knives for fingers. The way the Chucky doll face, how it evolves as the longer that Charles Lee Ray is inside the doll, it stops really looking like a doll. It starts looking like a human face to a degree. Jason's mask, how it gets some wear and tear over the years, and that axe cut that's in the top left corner, I believe, and everything like that. Leatherface, the skin mask that he wears, the different ones that he wears throughout the franchise. You remember stuff like that, and those are all practical effects. And like I say, that's what helps make those characters stand out and look great and iconic in a lot of ways. And I will always say this, that those type of looks outlast what you get with the CGI stuff, because when you look at what they did to Jackie Earle Haley in the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street, it largely pales in comparison to the makeup effect of what they did with Robert Englund back in the 80s. And even the worst designs of his makeup in those movies still looked better than that nonsense of what they had Jackie Earle Haley looking like. And I know even when that movie came out, people make jokes and there was memes and stuff about how bad Jackie Earle Haley looked. And the fact that Jackie Earle Haley's performance of Freddy is not bad. It's just everything around it was bad. And that's what hurt it. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have not got more of Freddy in any Nightmare on Elm Street sequels after that. And then too, like, there have been a lot of great special makeup effects artists and designers who have worked on a lot of these projects. I mean, Tom Savini, he is the father of Jason Voorhees, right? He created him. He also destroyed him, even though they brought him back. But that was the whole thing of, well, the person who made the ghost version of child Jason in the first movie is brought back to do the makeup effects and kill him off, in the final chapter, which is not the final chapter. But, Tom Savini has been a part of it. Also the fact that you've had K&B be a part of like the Halloweens and some of these other franchises. They have worked on it. And like all the different great special effects artists who have worked on these films and stuff like that, who put their blood, sweat, and tears. Because one thing I always admire about, I will always say this, I always admire stunt performers and also special makeup effect artists. Like growing up during a time when there was a lot of emphasis on, especially, knowing who a Rick Baker, who a Stan Winston, a Rob Bottin, K&B, Tom Savini, all these different great, special effects artists and everything, knowing who they are, learning about the craft that they do and everything. Cause it's not easy, cause I know I couldn't do it. Even if I tried, I couldn't apply no damn makeup effects the way they do and stuff like that. But when you see like these people being so into what they do and just enjoying, oh, we're going to make up something to where, they're going to rig it to where a shotgun blast is going to blow this freaking head off or something like that. And just the excitement in their faces when they show it, and the behind the scenes stuff that you would get on like DVDs and the documentaries and stuff like that. It's always fun just to watch that type of stuff. And I think that's what adds to why we as horror fans love looking at, horror movies and stuff, because seeing what these people can do with their actual hands and the tools that they're given, opposed to, like I said, I think in the Evil Dead episode, just getting on a computer and, oh, we're just going to add this here and add that there. What these people did, it brought life to, helping a horror film look great. And even if the horror film itself is not a great movie, but still you can tell they put their all into it, opposed to, again, just click clack on the computer and we got an effect, right? So yeah, that's like how I feel about horror, practical effects in the iconic makeup of the horror villains and everything. Another thing is how the 80s is very much so where you had the rise of the horror franchises. Because, I put it like this, to be a teenager or even a kid during the 80s had to be a great time, especially for horror fans, because you had the Halloweens, you had the Nightmare on Elm Streets, you had the Friday the 13th, all overlapping each other in the 80s. Like when you look at when the bulk of those franchises are, it's all throughout the course of the 80s. And that's not even including the other horror, franchises that you got throughout the 80s, like the sleepaway camps. And then what's the one? I can't remember, my eyes going blank right now. Jeez. But anyway, like I said, you have so many of the 80s. And then, of course, in the 90s, you get the Screams and I Know What You Did Last Summer and things like that. The horror franchises, like, that was a time, and how they kind of came about in the 80s, and also a lot of times the metaphors that a lot of those movies have in them. And I think that's what make them great. And then, too, merchandising, because consumerism became a huge thing throughout the 80s, right? And it's like, well, if we're going to have a franchise, we got to know how to merchandise it and get it out. And then you have the Halloween costumes, and it added to what made a lot of these franchises great and everything. Because you had kids. It went from kids just running around, with some crappy makeup on their face or wearing a sheet, looking, oh, I'm a ghost or whatever, to no, they out there in full, you got a little Freddy Krueger, or you got a little Michael Myers, or you got a little Jason Voorhees running around, and things like that. And then, like, as time is going on, you got the ghost face killers and even the Ben Willis. Hell, even Ben Willis is in Call of Duty Warzone. Like, there's a skin of him in that running around and everything. So, like, these looks are iconic, and just how these horror franchises became larger than life. And I think that's one thing that's missing from today, where after you get past like Saw, Final Destination, and everything, The Conjuring, you don't really have a lot of the franchises like you once did. And even the franchises don't, like today, they don't carry that same impact, at least I don't see it in the same way of the older horror franchises did. Now, I could be wrong on that. If anyone who's listening to this and you feel different, definitely hit me up. Let me know your take on this, because I do like to hear other people's opinions when it comes to stuff like this. So I'm going to ask this question. Does a franchise make villains less scary or more iconic? Because I would say this, I do feel like as the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise went along, Freddy became less scary. He became more funny because they put more emphasis on him cracking jokes and just kind of, being goofy and silly. Whereas like Michael Myers, it's kind of hard to do that. I mean, yeah, there's been a few instances. I mean, of course, famously, Halloween Resurrection, Busta Rhymes. I'm playing Michael Myers. Now I want you to go out the back door and everything, stuff like that, with him cussing him out and everything. He literally turns around and walks away. There's a little goofiness to that, but overall, Michael Myers has stayed consistent. He hasn't become less scary. And everything. Same thing with Jason Voorhees. Now, there are a few instances where it's like, nudge, nudge, wink, wink when it comes to certain things throughout the franchise, but he never becomes less scary. Chucky, I think becomes less scary as that franchise goes along. Once you include Tiffany and Glenn and Glenda, the whole family aspect. He has a whole freaking family, right? And everything. And, comes a little bit more less scary, but also becomes more iconic at the same time. So it's interesting. So that is a question I'm asking. Does the franchising make villains less scary or more iconic? And then also too, are there some that both happens in a way? So as we get ready to wrap up, I have one last topic before I get up out of here and everything, where I asked a question about favorite horror villains. Now, I asked this question on Threads, and I also asked it on Instagram. I did it on my JMT podcast Instagram account. So let's go to Instagram first and see what the folks said over there. So real quick, just looking at it, and the question I asked on Instagram was a little bit different than what I asked on Threads. So the one I asked on Instagram was, which horror villain would you never want to be trapped in a house with? And the two choices that I gave was either Chrome Skull from the Laid to Rest movies or Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And with 80% of the vote, Leatherface wins. It's pretty much a done deal. There's still some time left on the clock, but I don't see Chrome Skull making a comeback from this. But Leatherface is the one that people are saying that they would not want to be trapped in the house with. And I kind of don't blame them, because when you go into that Sawyer house, that is his playground and everything. But also at the same time, don't sleep on Chrome Skull either, which I feel is a underrated horror villain. But he didn't make my honorable mentions either and everything. So going over to Threads, I asked this. I said, who's the most underrated horror villain? And I did have a couple of choices. I said Sam from Trick or Treat, Angela from Sleepaway Camp, Esther from Orphan, and Billy from Black Christmas. Now, unlike the Instagram story, which was, just outright, it was a landslide, this one is a little bit more too close to call, because as of right now, because there's still some time left on the clock here, but as of right now, there is a 3-way tie between Sam, Angela, and Billy, where it's a 3-way tie. I don't know if anybody is going to come in and break the tie, but yeah. So those are who people are saying are underrated. Sam, Angela, and Billy. They're the underrated horror movie villains, but Esther kind of didn't get a lot of love on this one, but that's okay. But that is the poll that I have currently up over on my Threads account. If you are on Threads, you can follow me on at the J Giles, because that's the name I go under over there and everything. But that's kind of interesting that there's a 3-way tie going on. And like I said, even though there's still some time left on the clock, it's still a few hours left on it. I don't know if anyone's going to come in and kind of, change it up just a little bit to give an outright winner. But I will let you guys know the official results on the next episode when it comes to that. But I do find it kind of interesting that, and it kind of makes me wonder, do horror fans even really, do you know about Laid to Rest? Have you seen the Laid to Rest movies? Have you seen the Killer Chrome Skull or whatever? And I think that's the one reason why Leatherface kind of overwhelmingly won that one, because I don't think a lot of people probably have watched Laid to Rest and everything. So whereas I think when it comes to the poll I did on Threads, people know of these characters a little bit better. So I think that's why we kind of got that 3-way tie going on. So, yeah. So that's pretty much it for this episode. So let's go back through real quick as far as my top 10 horror movie villains. At number 10 was Billy. At number 9 was Esther. Number 8 was Sam. Number 7 was Angela. Number 6 is Death. Number 5 is Chucky. Number 4 is Leatherface. Number 3, Michael Myers. Number 2, Freddy Krueger. And number 1, Jason Voorhees. So that is my top 10. And then a couple of the things that I talked about, the rise of the horror franchise. Still continuing on talking about practical effects and iconic makeup and how it adds to a horror villain. And then also to the psychological aspect of a villain. Why do we like the horror villain? The whole sympathetic and versus irredeemable villains, even though both can draw us to a character, but what is it about the characters that we really like? The fear, the fascination, the rebellion from, said horror movie villain and everything. And then also too, I would love to know, what is your top 3 horror movie villains? Now, we talked about most underrated. Well, I would say this. What is your top 3 villains, and what are your top 3? Who are your top 3 villains and your most underrated? So basically, your top 3 villains, and then give me at least 1, maybe 2 most underrated, and everything. And I will ask those questions on Threads, on Instagram, and even over on YouTube. Because if you're listening on YouTube, definitely you can drop all your comments down below, and everything like that. And I will read the results of those questions that I've asked throughout this episode on the next episode. And the next episode, ironically, to kind of paraphrase a certain rap song. So the next episode is where I'll be doing my filmmaker spotlight. And I will be talking about none other than my favorite filmmaker, horror filmmaker that is. Talking about one Mr. John Carpenter, and also talking about what I consider to probably be one of the greatest, not just horror films, but greatest movies ever made. And I'm talking about his version of The Thing. So that will be the next episode for 60 Nights of Fright. I will be talking about John Carpenter, and as well as giving a more updated review of The Thing. So I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode. I will be back for episode 353. If you want to follow me, you can definitely hit me up all over social media, whether it's on Threads at the J Giles. Also, that's also my personal Instagram as well, or my movie talk Instagram at JMT Podcast. Also on YouTube, you can hit me up over there. Follow me there, where I am posting more, trying to be more consistent on YouTube, and everything. Twitch, I'm taking a little bit of a break. I want to revamp something before I actually get back into going on Twitch. But you can definitely follow me on Twitch over there, the _real J, over there, and everything like that. Of course, you can find all of the Movie Talk episodes, a part of the TV Zone Podcast Network. Wherever you listen to your podcast, just type in TV Zone Podcast Network, and you can find all the JayMovieTalk episodes like that as well. And that is pretty much for me. I want to thank you guys for listening, and I will be back next time to talk about John Carpenter and 1982's The Thing. Peace.